Welcome to my sewing room. I'm Di with Sister Chicks Quilting, and this is Sister, who just kind of sat down on my sewing machine. Guys, I honestly don't sew with her. I just bring her in because she's fun. We don't want any pooping on the machine, Sister. Thank goodness for disinfectant wipes. We couldn't get through the pandemic without them, and I'm not going to get through Sister without them. Well, Sister is just a handful, don't you think? She sure gets me going. It's a good thing I can put her away when I want to quilt. I do want to talk about the quilt on the wall behind me. Let me stand back so you can see most of it. It's a rainbow heart. Isn't that beautiful? Who doesn't love a rainbow? Rainbows are the best, and they're so happy. So this is just another another patchwork quilt, scrappy looking, and I call it my Scrappy heart quilt. Some people call them pixelated heart quilts. There's just all kinds of names for them. I have the pattern on my website, so you can go to sisterchicksquilting.com and download a free PDF that teaches you how to do this quilt. And it will tell you how much you need to buy. Now, the construction is very easy. It's row construction, so you just sew a row together, sew a second row together, and then you put those two rows together, and you do that all the way to the bottom. It's the same construction as the gingham grid quilt. Very easy, and you just have to pay attention where you're putting your blocks. There are 15 blocks across and there are 16 blocks down, and I've used a 5-inch block. Now, this may not be big enough for some of you. This quilt measures 67.5 inches wide by 72 inches long. And that's a really nice cuddle size quilt. But if you're tall, like the engineer and I and our kids, you may want to add to it. And there's several ways you can add to this quilt to make it bigger. The first one would be just add more of the low volume that's around the edge. Now, this quilt has 3 rows of low volume on the top and 3 rows of low volume on the bottom, starting from the point of the quilt. And then there's 2 rows on the side, as you can see right here. So just add another row all the way around. That would add 10 inches to your quilt, 10 inches in width, 10 inches in height. So your quilt would be 82 inches long and 77.5 inches wide. That's a pretty nice size quilt, but you could still make it bigger. If you didn't want to add the extra low volume, you could just make a bigger block. So I've used a 5-inch block, so cut a 6-inch or a 7 or an 8-inch block. But first, you ought to do the math to find out how big your quilt is going to be, because quilts grow really big, really fast. Another thing you can do with the quilt is make it smaller. So let me show you how. Here is a 5-inch square. If you just cut it in half the long ways and in half the wide way, you're going to have 4 2.5-inch blocks, and you could make the cutest baby quilt out of those 2.5-inch squares. You could make it the color of the nursery. You could make it rainbow. There's so many options by cutting it into the 2.5-inch square blocks. Anyway, it's a very versatile quilt and a fun quilt to make, and everybody loves a heart, so I say go with it. I had a couple of questions about my design wall and how they work. Do you remember when you were in grade school or in Sunday school when you were a little kid? And some of you millennials might not remember this because our teachers used flannel boards. So those of you that remember a flannel board, that is the exact same theory of how the design wall quilt works. So I have on my design wall quilt backing that this is quilt batting, and it's sticky like flannel, okay? and the blocks just stick right to it. And if you're saying, you know, I'm not sure I like that block, let's see how this green block looks here and how this blue block looks down here. It's like, I don't think so. But what you can do is change your blocks around and they stick just like a flannel board. So I've done mine on a quilt so I can take it down and have a blank wall. Some people have design walls mounted to their walls. They use the construction foam insulation and they mount that to the wall and then they put a frame around it and then they cover the foam with flannel fabric and there's their design wall. Or some people just use a flannel back tablecloth. I hear you can get them at the dollar store, but you know, pick up a tablecloth if you don't want to do one of these. Tape it to your wall and there's your design wall. Or if you're like me, you could use a bed. I always joke that I had never had a design wall because I have a small house. But instead I have a design bed. And so I use the guest bed and I lay out a ton of I've laid out a ton of quilts on the guest bed. Now, it was kind of fun when the engineer used to travel because we have a Cal King bed and I would sleep in the guest room and I would use the Cal King bed as my design wall. I'd get my quilt laid out, pieced and sewn together before he came home because he'd be gone for several days. So that worked out perfectly. But there's all kinds of options for laying a quilt out, or you could use your floor. But just another option. Well, we've talked about this enough. Let's get started putting this quilt together. I'm going to show you how it's done. So let me show you a method that I use to pick my rows up off of my design roll. And this allows me to take an entire row and sit at my machine and sew the entire row, not making any mistakes. I use one of my favorite methods and I use these little colored head pins. So this is what one looks like and they come in multiple colors. My pin cushions are filled with them. This is one of my chick pin cushions. Oh, by the way, I have chick pin cushions. Wouldn't you know it? And anyway, this is what I do. So I have these pins marked every other row on here. I pick up this first row. This edge is going to be sewn to this. So right side to right side, I pick it up. But I want you to notice right here I have a yellow pin and another yellow pin. That's going to tell me that the yellow pins match. That's the seam I want to make. But you can't sew it that way all at once. So I'm going to pick this piece up and hold it like this. And then I'm going to take the second set of pieces and I'm going to fold them over. And this is and I'm going to fold them in the same direction and put them on top and save a little space. And if you notice, I've got one with a yellow pin, one with a green pin, and this one has a yellow pin. Then the next piece I'm going to pick up is going to be sewn together. I'm going to fold this over and pick it up and put it on top. Do you notice that I'm holding them? I'm making a little bit of space between each of the rows. And this one to this one, putting it on top. So as you can see, that's just a little method. There's all different kinds of methods, but I like this one. It works for me, and it allows me to, like I say, sit at the sewing machine and get it all done at once. So here's this row, picking it up and putting it, and again, I'm placing them all on the side that I'm sewing them and down to the last set. So I'm going to fold this one over and put it on top. And we started out with 15, right? So there's an extra one, but no worry because it has a pin in it, a little round yellow pin. And look what's in this one, a little round yellow pin. So let's go to the sewing machine and sew this row together. I'm at my machine And I've got that entire row that I picked up, and these are the sides that I folded over together. So everything that is right facing to each other, I sew. So I have them in the sewing position already, see? So I'm gonna set these squares down, and I'm going to start sewing right sides to right sides every other one. This way, I'll move the camera down and you can actually see me working with these. When I quilt or piece, I like to sew with an open toe foot or a clear foot, and that allows me to see exactly where my stitches are and how where my 1/4 inch is. It just makes it easier for me. You may notice that I have a Band-Aid on my finger, and I've been sewing for practically my whole life and never done this. And I've been quilting on the long arm since 2017 and never done this. Last night I was basting down a quilt that was totally cut and pieced on the bias, and it was a bear. And I basted my finger. The good news is I didn't get any blood on the quilt, but I basted my finger. There it is. It was pretty gross. I did it about, it was about 1/8 of an inch from the tip of my finger, but it did go through my fingernail, and my reaction was to jerk my hand out of there. So it went through my fingernail all the way through to the other end, and I just pulled and ripped it out. So there's a tear. Last night it was so painful. So I have this row completed, all of the right sides to the right sides. But what we want to do now is match the pins. So I have a white pin here, and here's another white pin. Can you see the white pins? And I just lay them together how they're supposed to go, save the white pins, and then I line them up right sides to right sides. Sew them down. Now this piece has got 4 blocks on it. And let's make another one. So I'm looking for a yellow or a blue pin. And open up this one, and there's a yellow pin, and here's a yellow pin. So again, I put these 2 yellow pins together in the direction of the pin that I pinned them, and put these 2 blocks together and sew them. Now, you may have your own method of keeping your rows straight, and you can use whatever method you want. This is just easy for me, and like I say, here's orange to orange. I don't have to get up, and I can sit at my machine and stitch together an entire row. So it works for me. I've shared it with a few other quilters, and they think it's pretty slick. Let's see, these 2 pieces, this is the very last piece. It's number 15. It was an odd man out, so it was not attached to another piece. And if you'll stick with me, we probably only have, what, a few more seams, and we'll have an entire row sewn together. So let me show you how that's going to look. This is a blue pin. I'm looking for another blue pin, and here it is. So I'm putting these two pieces together, pulling the pins and matching them up, right sides together. And I'll sew those. Here I've got a purple and a green pin. And so here's a purple pin and a purple. We'll sew those this way. If I know I'm matching the pins, I don't even have to bother with trying to line up the fabric. I don't have to stop and look at it a second time and wonder if I got it right. And then I have this long strip with a green pin in it, and here's a green pin. So I'm going to put these two together, and pretty excited when I put these two together, I'll have a complete row. And voila, this is a complete row, starting out with, this is the top of the hearts, the two hearts, with those two purples on the top. And then it has 3 low volume squares. And then it has 2 more purple hearts, and then 4 low volume squares to the end. So there I've done a row. I'm gonna go to the pressing table and press them and sew my rows together. I have the bottom half of the heart sewn, all those rows together, and now I'm going to turn it over and press it in the same direction I've been pressing all of the rows. I'm going to press them down. Then when they're all pressed down, I'll flip it over and give it a good press on the other side. Then we can sew our hearts together. Kind of exciting. Such a fun, bright, colorful quilt. Just takes a little bit of time. Especially on the layout. And then it will all come together. I can't emphasize the importance of pressing. Pressing those seams flat. You want to press, you don't want to iron. Well, what you don't want to do is you don't want to stretch them like this, you know, pull it and stretch the fabric. I'm lifting as I'm going down. You just want them to lay flat. You don't want them to be stretched out of shape, which an iron could easily do, stretch fabric out of shape. So I'll finish pressing and I'll meet you at the machine when I sew the bottom of the heart together with the top of the heart. Well, as you can see, all of my rows are sewn together. I got it finished. I think it just turned out darling. I've got the pattern on my website at sisterchicksquilting.com. It's a PDF download, so it should be easy to do. I was just patient with sewing my rows together. I believe the whole quilt took me sewing time from about 6 hours probably. So do it with a friend or do it with just yourself. Put a good tune on and enjoy your time at the machine. Let me stand back so you can see it a little bit. But first, next week, I'm going to a quilt retreat. I quilt with, been going to the same quilt retreat with the same 7 ladies for several years now. And we're going to be up in Cascade, Idaho. The only rule about quilt retreats is what goes on at a quilt retreat stays at a quilt retreat. That is unless I record it. So I thought it would be fun to film it. You'll get to meet everybody in my sewing group and you'll have a good time seeing all the projects we're working on. But until then, have a great week and enjoy your Scrappy heart quilt.